on New to You, Freaks Part 3, Fantastic Four Iron Man, big in Japan. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the New to You Show. We are continuing in our topic of freaks. Freaks. Yeah, we are being very kind in using that term.
Lovable freaks.
Yeah.
People
self-identifying.
We're not saying, hey, you're a freak. We're not saying that.
Yes.
We're saying like I'm
we're
a freak.
freaks.
Yeah.
And we're freaking out.
So I'm one of your freaks, John Holt. With me is...
Another one of your freaks, Julian Cage.
And I'm another freak. Some even call me a spaz, Keith Vincent.
You can't say that. That's like a UK bad word term.
Yeah, that's a UK bad word.
What is that?
Can't edit this in England.
It's like saying, like if you were to say, if you if you use the term, well, so like now it's not proper to use the word retarded, right here, and spaz is the equivalent in the UK because it's like spastic. Is the term.
Like people
Well, I'm
with
sorry
like
about
certain
that.
motor disorders, yeah.
Right.
We learned
Well, I'm
that because
sorry.
we would write it in many, many scripts of our children's television and be flagged for it.
I would also write far-right propaganda into the scripts, and that was also flagged somehow.
In Germany.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm the guest freak this week. I've been temporarily mutated to be on the show. This is Adam Mater.
We gave him a speaking hole.
And Adam, before we continue, though, I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings by saying spaz. I'm sorry, England. I didn't mean to do that.
That's all. They don't listen.
I want to say maybe a geek then, because geeks were in freak shows and they would eat fire and stuff.
No, geeks don't eat fire.
Yeah.
No.
Geeks were fire eaters.
Geeks ate
and
the
they would
heads-
eat the heads off chickens, yeah.
That was their whole shtick, though, is eating the heads off chickens.
No. They also ate fire.
All right.
I'll find it on the internet.
They ate fiery hot chickens.
All right. Then, yes, I am definitely a geek.
Oh, man. Freak
All right.
off.
So,
Get that Nashville hot chicken.
So before we get into Keith's pick this week, Adam, what was new to you this week?
It's new to you. It's been new to me this week, and last couple of weeks actually is a dear friend of mine, Matty Fasano, is a musician on the Brooklyn label God Mode. He's performed as Fasano, and as his new project, his a new dance project called House of Feelings. He has a radio show that's called House of Feelings Radio. It's affectionately known as Butt Lab. That's been a name for the show and his party series that he does that we've pitched to him. He refuses to use it, but everyone calls it that, so it is now known as Butt Lab. Anyways, he has a weekly show Fridays, 7 to 9. Tune into Newtown Radio. That's Newtown, not New to You Town.
And U-Town?
No, it's not New Metalsburg, which is the place where we send Korn and Slipknot and all the bands from last week to retire.
And we will never speak their names again.
And then build a wall around it.
And they're going to pay for that wall.
They could. They're very wealthy people.
Probably.
Yeah. It's a great show. It's mainly Matty plays a lot of disco, funk, house, techno, pop, kind of anything. And he has a lot of guests, a lot of Brooklyn musicians stop by to do like brief interviews. It's really fun. I had the privilege to be on the first one as the guest. Played a lot of fun stuff. Talked with Matty. I now prank call the show a lot, so you should tune in for that. Playing different characters. By the time this comes out, they may have pulled the plug on the phone. But yeah, tune in. It's on newtownradio.com. I think just Google Newtown Radio.
Newtown Radio.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
you're
the show's
saying
House of Feelings Radio.
He puts it up on Mixcloud?
Yeah, it's up on Mixcloud. House of Feelings is the name of the radio show. Don't type in Butt Lab. You can type in Butt Lab and you'll get my mix for it. But House of Feelings. We'll have links on the page for this.
Yeah,
right,
definitely.
John?
Yep.
Yep. Great.
And we'll tweet. And I definitely have seen your guys' tweets where you're like, I'm going to be on Butt Lab.
Well, I'm eager to move forward, but how did it get the name Butt Lab?
So Maddie had emailed a few of us saying, like, I want to start this party series, I'm just looking for a name. Like, he was really struggling for a name, and he didn't really give much of a prompt, and his original suggestion was Underwater, which we were like, Maddie, I don't know, not feeling that one. So there was this email thread, and I had suggested Butt Lab, and everyone's like, yeah, that's great. Let's do Butt Lab. And he's like, guys, it can't be Butt Lab. He kept saying, we're all like getting so excited. We're all like starting to make art for it and stuff. And he's like, guys, it can't be Butt Lab. But it has pretty much been since. So
was it like Radio Lab with butts? Is that where did the
There's no rhyme. I thought I was thinking if I'm a bored person in New York and I'm walking around and I see a flyer for Butt Lab this Friday,
Truly.
9 p.m. to
Absolutely.
who knows to question mark. I want to go to that party. Like,
Yeah.
that sounds like
Yeah.
a fun party. I wanted it to be funny. Like that was my intention too. It's like it's very like you don't want a serious one that's like I don't know. People have stuff like Disco Odyssey or something, or like even more serious than that. I didn't want it to be like that. I just wanted it to be something, I don't know, that's inviting, that arouses curiosity. Yeah, he's done a couple parties now, and it's been fun in both Manhattan and Brooklyn.
Now, does he refer to it as House of Feelings and you guys?
He usually just calls it Butt Lab.
Wow,
But
all right.
all the handles
coming
and
around
stuff,
to it?
yeah.
Nice.
I mean, he introduces the show as House of Feelings Radio, but I think he says AKA Butt Lab a lot. And
Well, once he embraces Butt Lab, turn it into like this is a serious science like term.
Right,
Like
yeah.
we're doing like
about fatty deposits around the butt, yeah.
like seismic twerking experiments and stuff.
Right. Yeah, just someone strapped in like 0G chamber twerking. What are the effects of this?
That's right. We found it. We found the energy source.
Inner wind tunnel.
Yeah.
Cheeks constant.
You can find it at newtownradio.com. And their featured show this week is Valley of Freaks. Wow, apropos.
Freaky.
You should call in as Dr. Gluteus.
Well, it's
I
funny.
am the head of the Butt Lab.
Well,
How
I've
dare you
called
try
in,
to steal
I've called
my
in
thunder.
as a patient of Butt Lab asking for test results. So, yeah, I guess you're right. I should call in as the doctor now. And be, I will
I'm
not
Max.
make it into work tomorrow. I am deathly ill.
My assistive device is not helping me get into the office.
I'm trapped in the zero gravity twerk chamber again.
Too many G's.
Please sauce the tubs in vat A. Sauce the butts, please.
And take them out to get them some air and some sunlight.
Please don't allow my samples to get contaminated. In my absence.
Acids.
All right.
All right,
Max
you're
Gluteus.
freaks.
Butts are conjunctions.
Yeah.
And they connect things. So let's connect.
Right. They
to
connect
their
your
next
legs
thing.
to your torso. Adam, thanks. We'll put some links on there and
Yeah.
get people over to the House of Feelings.
I'm definitely going to listen to that.
Yeah. So, Jules, you have a pick. Let's roll into it.
No, I had a I already had a pick on this.
I'm putting you on blast.
Keith's
All right.
pick.
So, Keith, you had a pick. Let's roll into it.
It's problem time.
I do have a pick. So as Julian mentioned a couple weeks ago, he wanted to cover the movie Freaked. So we were like, well, how are we going to come up with a theme that fits that? So we came up with Freaks, and we were like, yeah, we can find some stuff. And but I got to say, I really had a hard time with this, and not because there weren't a lot of options that I could have chosen, kind of because I had trouble finding something that I could call freakish or freaky and not think that it's kind of derivative or like as a bad thing.
Or derogatory.
Yeah, derogatory. Thank you. There's certainly plenty of things out there that self-identify as freaks, and I could have gone down that route. I kind of wanted to find something that I considered freaky or freakish, but was not, kind of not starting that way. You kind of not purposefully doing it, kind of like a John
not
Waters
too on the
thing.
nose.
Right. So it made me think of this specific comic. Well, I mean, I thought of a lot of things. I was gonna talk about certain artists that I love, Egon Schiele and stuff, but it just all again seemed kind of rude to consider these just amazing artists freaks, or to define them in that way. So I went down this rabbit hole of just looking through all kinds of things and different music, different movies. And I landed on a couple of comic books that I really liked. I don't know if you guys are like this, but I react very viscerally to visual mediums. Like certain cartoons, I just can't watch if they look a certain way. Or I mean, I can watch them. It's not like I have a terrible reaction, but they make me uncomfortable. There's a certain the 8-ball comics kind of make me feel uncomfortable. Along those lines, there are certain comics. In fact, Julian used to read this French comic about these brothers that it just made my skin crawl. What was it called, Jules?
Hold on, it'll come back to me.
Okay,
Keep
yeah.
talking.
You know, I've always had this kind of reaction to certain art that kind of makes me feel like a freak show, like I would be looking at a freak show. And there's a specific comic book that I love and I've loved for years that I feel like fits the mold in that it's about all these monsters attacking, and it's drawn in this way that is just like freaky. It's a freaky story. It's a freaky drawing. It's a freaky comic book and a freaky story. It was a limited run of the Fantastic Four, and it was a team up. Fantastic Four and Iron Man. Series was called Big in Japan. Growing up when I did, my comics never involved the Fantastic Four. To me, they were just like, I really don't care.
They're milquetoast.
Yeah, or
Bunch
just
of
like,
nerds.
yeah, it's that wasn't where the cutting edge of comics was. As I got older, I learned to respect what was achieved with the old Fantastic Fours, what the boundaries that they pushed through, and its importance in the genre. By the time I was buying comics and aware of it, studied enough of it to know what I like and what I still will spend money on, Fantastic Four was not in the picture. However, one day I stumbled across this just crazy comic book, this Big in Japan book. So it came out in 2005, October. The first issue came out in October 2005. It was written by this fellow named Zeb Wells and penciled by the main artist is named Seth Fisher. The storyline from the start is wacky because it's the Fantastic Four going to Japan to help open up this
Kaiju museum.
Yeah, this museum of giant creatures. So in this reality of this comic book, all the Godzillas, all that stuff had happened to Japan, and they've finally built a museum to it. And you know, the beginning of the comic book is pretty funny because they're touring it, and this scientist is saying, you know, like, yeah, well, you know, we're very, you know, no place in the world has gone through what Japan has gone through, but we've learned to harvest all this like interesting material from all these beasts, and now we can do all this stuff. So I mean, it's the whole comic is predicated on, oh yeah, all Godzilla stuff happened in Japan, and also the Fantastic Four exist in the same universe.
And Iron Man.
Yeah, and Iron Man.
And the Fantastic Four, like if you look at number one, they're fighting a giant like monster on the cover, and it's in they tie that all into
exactly,
like the Mole Man and the underground monsters of the Mole Man are kind of tied in.
Well, there's not only that, there are several little Easter eggs like that of all these old, because Fantastic Four used to fight these giant monsters all the time in the early days, and a lot of them have made their way into this book. Sadly, I'm not as much of an insider to know the exact ones, but there are a bunch sprinkled in here, especially to like old fans of Fantastic Four to find them. But the storyline is really zany and really wacky and self-referential, and the more you know about Japanese manga culture, the more you know about these old Godzilla movies, the more you know about all these insider things, all these insider Fantastic Four storylines, the more you get out of it. But even without all that, it's still just a really interesting book. What happens is the Fantastic Four are going to this opening. What do you know? All the monsters break out. the Fantastic Four and Iron Man are trying to fight all these creatures, and they eventually end up inside one of these giant beasts. And this is when things go from weird to really weird. The third and the fourth issue, most of it takes place inside this giant creature, and it's amazing. It's so surreal, and it's drawn with amazing detail. Like, I don't know if anyone out there knows the artist Jeff Darrow, but he's well known for just drawing all this intricate detail in his comics. And this fella, Seth Fisher, has a similar amount of detail, but it's done in this almost surreal way. There's a grotesqueness to some of the drawings.
Yeah, and it's more like lighthearted.
Yeah,
it's like the cartoon, because like Darrow's details are often like very textural as well. Like he's got 1 or 2 line weights that he plays with, and it's all consistent, and he really gets his depth from texture. And this guy, he has a couple minor line weights as well, and a lot of his depth comes from using his planes and using his color and his compositions. So it's a little bit like he doesn't have quite the level of like intricate textural detail, but like that was the direct parallel I also drew, was that this was like a Jeff Darrow style of like clean, simple lines with simple coloring too.
Yeah, but I mean I would argue that's Jeff Darrow didn't invent that. It
you
definitely
see it in a lot of, like, French comics.
French and kind of Dutch comics have this like very consistent clean line weight with it's colored like that as well, like you said. But once they're inside this giant monster, every panel is just like this amazing artwork filled with weird tongues, eyeballs, fingers everywhere. Like he just plays with this super surreal space, and every panel is just a joy to kind of like stumble through. That I don't really have much more to say about it. I would love to get your fellows' impressions on it. I would just like to say that it's a really fun take on what could be considered as a tired property, and it's just treated in someone allowed this weird thing to happen, this weird thing to be written, and this weird thing to be made, and I'm very thankful of it. And sadly, the artist, Seth Fisher, he died soon after this, like right after this was made.
When he was celebrating the release of this book.
So, I mean, the story that I read was he lived in Japan, and he was celebrating the release of the publishing of these comics.
Of the graphic novel or the fourth book.
Sadly fell off of a
7-story or something.
A tall building, and died from injuries related to that. And to me, it's just a shame. And luckily, he had made a couple of other things before this, but he was very young, and I would have loved to have seen where he was going to go with this stuff. But he's gone, and that's sad. And I'm sure it's sad because he probably had a wonderful family, and a lot of people are far more devastated by his loss than I have the right to be. But I still think it's a bummer when somebody dies so young and with
so much talent,
such a new voice, such an interesting new voice.
Yeah.
But I don't want to make that about this. Make this about that. I want to make this about this crazy, weird, cool comic book that he made.
Yeah, it
just
looks
filled
like
with monsters, filled with, it's the way. The reason I say it belonged in the Freaks thing is because it's filled with these weird, freaky monsters that are all just very interesting, very interestingly designed. Nothing looks the way you would imagine, and everything's got this. Well, not everything, but there's a lot of this interesting, grotesque nature to some of the art. So that's all I'm going to say about it right now, and I'm just going to open it up to whoever wants to talk first about it.
Yeah, so I would say, the book looks like was a lot of fun to draw.
A lot of fun, but a big commitment.
A lot of work, but like a lot of like wacky, interesting, fun stuff. And the characters that were designed were all kind of fun and funny. He even plays with like making chibi versions of the characters, which are like definitely like Western chibi kind of thing. Like they don't have the same disparate proportions and like cuteness that you would want. It's a little maybe more real in some ways. There's also a funny thing where, especially in the first few pages of the book, anyone you see who's Japanese has sort of like normal eyes. Like their eyes look like they're drawn realistically more and in a comic style. But all the Fantastic Four have just big round, like circle eyes with little dot pupils. So they get, it's sort of like, oh, they're the weirdos in this situation too. They just come off as weird. He draws Iron Man really weird too.
Well, everybody in none of the superheroes look like superhero proportions.
Yeah, except for
nobody has big muscles.
For Sue, I mean, the Fantastic Four are never like super muscle.
Yeah,
people.
but you would still look at them and go like, oh, this is a superhero comic. In this, no panel of this do I think, oh, that's a superhero character.
Yeah, he doesn't have. I think like superhero comic art style is somewhat formulaic, or there's just a certain aesthetic, and he doesn't have that aesthetic at all. He's definitely like coming from a totally different kind of set of influences,
right?
And he just draws. I think he just draws the way he draws, and he's not trying to emulate anybody in a way.
Yeah. The also noting the story, it was very stream of consciousness. It's how it kind of came off, and I know Keith, you like that storytelling mode a lot. And this is sort of a general recommendation.
Well, as long as it ends now, as long as it has a proper ending. I don't like stream of consciousness that doesn't flow
just peters
right.
off or something. Yeah. So if you want something that's like crafted, a different style of storytelling, but also has the psychedelica, I would definitely check out like Doom Patrol, the Vertigo run. Heavier, but also with some good psychedelica is like Alan Moore's Swamp Thing.
Yeah.
His run on that.
That was really good.
Concrete, it's like an indie comic and also very like personal and playful, but about a guy who's made of rocks and these like just normal people who live with him and kind of deal with that. And there's like a metaphysical aspect to who he is and an existential crisis that he's living all the time. The Invisibles is another good one for like weird psychedelic and strange culture kind of stuff. And then definitely Transmetropolitan is all about like freaks and weird stuff. But if you dig this comic, this is like a little appetizer to get into those longer run series with like really well crafted stories and like crazy wackiness. But this is like just the right amount. Like I think if this was more than 4 issues, I would be like, all right, I'm tapped.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, as long as it was, with this kind of pacing that these 4 issues are in, I couldn't handle more. But if it was paced out in a different way, I could read this for years.
Yeah.
I mean, I had gotten into Seth Fisher as a comic artist from our mutual friend Adam Sachs, who had known Seth Fisher personally. I forget how, but. So he had kind of, because I think I was talking about Jeff Darrow or something like that, and I was looking at that, and he was like, oh, is that Seth Fisher? And I was like, no, I've never heard of Seth Fisher. And so I kind of learned about him. I hadn't read this particular comic because it's kind of harder to find digitally, at least. But I had read, because I was interested in his art style, I had read a couple of other comics he had drawn. One was a Batman miniseries called Snow. It was about, it kind of centered around the...
Mr. Freeze.
Yeah, Mr. Freeze. And then I also read another super freaky, weird one called, which I think is in the same vein as This Big in Japan, which was Green Lantern in Weird World. World. And so it's like basically Green Lantern wakes up in Weird World, which is this like weird other dimension, like kind of dreamscape almost.
It probably is something I don't know the Green Lantern mythos, but it's probably along the lines of like that 60s like Mephipopolis kind of stuff that they were doing. You remember that like Batmite and Mr. Mephipopolis and
Mr. Mixoplix.
Yeah, that guy. Like or Bizarro, like where they just like had these sort of wacky characters and wacky worlds that would show up.
But like this, it took like a superhero character and just put him in a totally different context with a totally different art style, full of weird characters, weird details, kind of stream of consciousness story. I'm even wondering if it might have been the same writing team. And it's just, again, he doesn't remember where he is. He's trying to figure out where he is and who he is and why. And it's again, the art is totally interesting and lots of neat details to look at, lots of cool characters. The Batman one was interesting because it's a much straighter Batman story, but his art style just brings a totally
A
different
richness.
vibe to it. Yeah, and you know, it's also like the colors are like kind of bright, which for Batman is unusual, and you know, like just funny details like Alfred like is wearing like pajamas with like a bunny pattern on them and things like that. Just
Like
things
I love playfulness still.
yeah. Again, playfulness and just a different a style that you're not used to seeing. So, I think it was always these short runs. So I think maybe the publishers knew that like maybe it would outstay its welcome in a long thing. Also, maybe he just can't keep up that level of art style, and that level of detail over a long series that has to crank out issues every week.
Right.
But it was, I think, a fun way to a fresh take on an old franchise, like Keith was saying. But yeah, I just love like really just looking at the drawings.
Yeah.
I don't always love them. Like I think the way he draws people is sometimes kind of stiff and weird.
Yeah.
But
Well,
like,
that's
when
the
he gets-
grotesque part that
Yeah,
I'm talking
yeah,
about.
He'll
yeah.
get very real in some parts, and it looks like disproportionate in.
Yeah, and other times they're just very like cartoony or caricature-ish,
Mm-hmm.
and so it's a bit inconsistent, I guess. But there's something about that sort of kind of cartoony meets realism thing. That there's kind of tension to it that makes it interesting and makes me like want to look at it some more. Plus, also just there's something about the neat level of detail that I don't know, I find fun to look at.
Yeah, you can just kind of get lost in each panel.
Yeah.
I've grown accustomed to, and I'm lazy when it comes to drawing in a lot of cases where I want my character work to do all the work. Therefore, my background stuff I can just kind of take a break on a little bit, but not the case with this guy. Like
Yeah.
he never shirks from a single background.
Yeah, and
Everything is like fully drawn, so much of it.
and every part of the panel is in there. And that's also interesting because that's something I've like in mangas where like the backgrounds are often more detailed and more like highly rendered than the characters, and so maybe that's part of his connection to Japan and being there and stuff. I don't know.
And there's a visual language and a reason for that.
Yeah.
Like you are imparting a certain atmosphere or a
I
certain.
think it helps ground characters in reality in a way.
Yeah, and usually to your pausing on a background is like it's you're supposed to pour over the detail and stop and look at it because it's your establishing shot.
Yeah.
Or it's a beat in a story where you're supposed to stop and think about what you've been listening to or read the dialogue slowly with this picture. There's like a reason for it.
Yeah.
As well.
But yeah, it's definitely the kind of comic where you just kind of pour over every page, and he also does like get kind of surreal or put in details or make sort of impossible compositions, but you kind of don't question them and they kind of add to the storytelling and things like that. So he's definitely like thinking a lot about what he's doing, and I guess it's comparing it unfairly to a lot of other comics that just have to have a really high output, and it's hard to do that. I really admire the guys who can just really like bang out those pages every week. But I'm glad that there's other artists that are given the chance to just like go all out every now and then.
Really
Murder,
give
did
it some tender love.
Did you get a chance to get into this a little bit?
Yeah, I've been flipping through it while you guys are talking too, and I checked out the images Keith sent. I'm obviously not an animator artist, so I can't speak as in depth as you guys, but it is pretty cool. It's really wacky. I, for a short time, subscribed to Fantastic Four, like in the earlier mid '90s. As a kid, I don't know why I picked it though, because I thought it was I don't know, it's a little flat sometimes, or but this is a great take on it, and I also I found the movies too to be similarly like whatever. The characters are really broad. It's a lot of like Thing is like this jock or whatever he's supposed to be, and Human Torch is this like hot shot. Yeah, I don't know. It always felt not very interesting. And then Reed was like the Donatello brain
It's
of
like
the group.
the Fantastic Four stereotypes.
Yeah, and then Invisible Woman's just a woman.
The woman,
so,
yeah. If you can see her, she.
But I love
She's
how
there.
this
We
is so
promise.
great. This reminds me of like weird dreams I have or something.
Yeah.
Like, I'm looking at a panel now where they're on top of this gigantic monster, and he's so big that the pores of his skin are large enough to just go through, and it's absolutely disgusting. Thing is just ripping the pore open so that Iron Man can go inside. It's
And
so
it
gross.
looks like they're standing on a field of mouths.
Yeah, it's really great. I think the style's awesome, and I haven't really been reading the dialogue as much, but I feel like that's like the least important thing on the page probably.
Right now, yeah.
Yeah, no,
Yeah, so it seems like it's a very like, is it just like kind of a, not slapstick's the right word, but like just a mad dash to kill this monster, the four.
Yeah, it's wacky. Like,
Like,
Yeah,
it's not
and,
like
and
you're
they're
not
also solving the mystery of what it is and why,
Okay,
what it is.
right. I've noticed
but
that.
it's pretty like,
It's not like
and-
cut away to someone's office and they're like,
it's definitely an and then
Sure,
yeah.
story.
There aren't like B stories or like.
No, it's just like, and then they go inside the guy, and then the guy who's been with them the whole time turns out to be bad, and then it opens the
Sure.
portal, and then they fight the monster, and again, it's not bad. It's a form of storytelling, and that's what
No,
they
totally.
use.
And it seems great for this, like, well, for the style and for how short it is. It's just 4 issues, and they're not, each one's not super long. It seems really cool. It's a nice, like, mad dash.
Yeah.
Comic book writing.
Yeah,
A good sprint.
yeah, no,
But to I mean, I do want to give the Fantastic Four a little love. I mean, like I started this saying that like, Fantastic Four, in the '90s when I was heavy into comics, they were the ones But the thing that I don't want taken for granted is that the Fantastic Four broke real ground in comic books during their time. They created some things through Fantastic Four that we really take for granted in comics now. The whole, before the Fantastic Four, you never really had these kind of interpersonal relationships in comics. They really broke that ground.
were
They
they
broke.
the first like real team like
No,
team
I doubt
comic?
it.
No.
I doubt it. But they are the first team where the comic book was more about their relationship than who they're battling,
Right.
and how their relationships with each other affects their performance while battling. And like I said, it's easy to take that for granted now, but the Fantastic Four did that, and it's really easy to take Stan Lee for granted, because he's in all the movies and he's such a ham, and you hear him speak, and he just sounds like he doesn't sound as like groundbreaking as his stuff. He and those guys' stuff really was.
He
at the
comes off a
time.
little bit like a car salesman.
Yeah, he comes off as a self-aggrandizing kind of guy, but they at a lot of innovation happened with him at the helm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting though. Like they were making properties and products, and smartly so. Like making interesting characters, making stuff they would have fun writing. And the archetype that the Fantastic Four, more than the family group, is they're bound by a single betrayal to some degree. So you have a man who's super smart and has some hubris and takes them all out into space where they're bombarded by cosmic rays because he didn't think ahead or know enough ahead about this thing, and now they fall back to Earth, Icarus style. But they were on his ride. Like he's the Icarus, and they're on his back, and he's saying, "Hey, I can take us to the sun." And now they're freaks. I mean, that's kind of like that's what the thing is, and that's his tension. And when in the comics nowadays, and like when they do the like future world, like the Earth X kind of stuff, the extrapolation, the furthest reach for Reed Richards and his character, the end line for that is he becomes this solitary outcast. He's the victim of his own hubris
He feels
all
that
the way
guilt.
through.
He carries
and
that guilt.
constantly, but he continues to make the same mistake constantly, and that's his like lot. That's the character they keep him to be.
And this is the evolution of that. But when these guys first came onto the scene, that's not how you saw a comic book. Even Batman, who is now like a lot of the stories are about his personality. It was never about his personality at this time period.
Right.
And it was about, and you never knew about his like inner struggles with anything, but that's what the Fantastic Four and those guys brought to the table. That's what Marvel brought to the table.
Like the first thing is the Thing getting
the
really
characters.
mad at Richards for what he's done to him.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
And he's like the most outwardly a freak of all the four characters.
and that also in comics, you never had a character who was just like, I can save the world, but look at me.
Yeah,
that was
I
never.
hate being a hero.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
Dawn.
And like I said, we take a lot of these things for granted. Another thing we take for granted are a lot of the really fun cosmic storylines that they came up with, like the idea of Galactus. So here's a comic book, 12 and 14-year-olds are reading it, and it's about this creature that eats planets. But before he eats a planet, he's going to send an emissary down to tell the planet, oh, by the way, I'm going to eat this planet, so whoever can should just get off the planet.
Right.
Like, that's a really weird, cool storyline that, out of context, is like really innovative. Like, I mean, maybe there were some myths or something that they were reading that might have been touching. I've never heard of anything like
Yeah,
that.
they had a lot. Marvel's had a lot of really far out stories.
Yeah,
think
and
that's the challenge.
Inhumans too. The Inhumans, like there's been a battle raging in the universe for eons between these two intergalactic species, and they pulled like cavemen out of the caves and took them to another planet, and basically have been
Weaponizing them.
turning them into, like selectively breeding them, and now they're this race of powerful beings. Like, that's a really weird, interesting concept.
I think the challenge with, like, it's a lot of those comics are great in a, like, ooh, cool, let's like look at the overall, like, basically when you step back and read it on Wikipedia or in like an overarching kind of thing, or in a conversation in another comic about it. The challenge of like reading a Silver Surfer or any of the Marvel DC like cosmic encounter kind of
Green
things.
Lantern stuff is
Very
trippy.
it gets very, the best ones, like the best Green Lantern is Green Lantern and Green Arrow going across the country with Green Arrow showing him like, hey man, when you're not floating around in space, like these are the real problems. Like here's racism, here's poverty, here's this stuff. And that's the challenge for myself as a reader, to stay interested in cosmic stuff is very tough. It's a very tough thing to maintain, because there are, when you're dealing with people on Earth in a planetary setting, it stays
It's not
literally.
it's not relatable.
It stays literally grounded.
Yeah, they're cool ideas, but like you said, they're hard to build a story around.
But it's
I
interesting.
disagree. They did it for 50 years, almost 60 years.
I should
so
say, as a kid, it was hard for me to get too invested in like some of the in space and stuff. It got a little. Again, this is as like a 10-year-old.
Yeah.
It can get a little heady. It starts to take on like existential vibes.
I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I had no problem with space. Star Wars and
Yeah, but
Yeah,
Star Wars
and
is like
Brave
a
Star, all
Western.
these like crazy.
No, I mean when it's like, oh, the Fantastic Four, like they fight monsters sometimes, or Doctor Doom.
Yeah.
Now they're fighting a thing that eats planets. Like
Yeah.
that just seems.
But even beyond the eating planets thing, which is like, let's solve this crazy puzzle. Now, like, they have to amp it up and go to the next thing. So it's like, hey, so now we're gonna like take the cosmic time boat to the Etherosphere and fight the human planet who's having a problem with Galactus and this other guy. And so now it's like, yes, if you were to still it, it might be like an interesting story about negotiation and different personalities and
Sure,
stuff.
yeah.
But it gets very ungrounded in like magical kind of science, spacey. Whereas like Star Wars and stuff stays very character grounded.
It's like,
and
yeah,
very
you're
good.
the outlaw. I'm gonna hunt you
But
down. Or like,
But I think like like getting back to Big in Japan, it's again our characters, like there's a history that's involved in terms of, this is Japan. There's this backstory. It ties into their history in the world of the universe, of the Marvel universe, and it all plays together very well. And they, even if it's a wacky story, it's got some gravity to it and got some like grounding and weight.
Well, it's clear too
good.
what they need to do to like just need to kill this monster, or,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, or get rid of the virus in him, whatever
But
it is. Yeah.
it is a cool thing too, where they're like they're small to it and they're trying to figure it out, and it's
Right.
a lot of it. They have to kind of work their way through the problem before the problem becomes out of control. And so that's kind of what's fun about this book too, is that there is a little problem solving that they're doing, and so they're just ahead of the story enough that it doesn't seem too like Deus Ex Machina or something.
Yeah.
This also reminds me a lot of just in I don't know, the way like it takes you through the what like the body of the person and stuff. It reminds me of the Magic School Bus books.
Oh yeah.
Where they'd like go inside the body and like the bus would drive down your ventricle or whatever. And yeah, it just reminds me of that playfulness. That was always fun. Like, it's that movie Inner Space or something.
Inner Space has that.
Yeah, I love
Yeah.
that movie.
What was the one where it was an older movie where they inject the people into somebody's body to like laser cancer in their brain or something?
Yeah, I forget.
But there's a great scene where they like go in these like wetsuits out into the body, and these white blood cells start like attaching and attacking them, and they have to like laser them off.
I forgot the best part about this book. It turns out that one of their oldest villains, the Mole Man, is kind of a big player in this comic, and he creates these characters called Moloids. Since the 60s, this has been a storyline with them.
It's like Hollow Earth.
In this, at the end of this, the monster, they shoot it off into space, and the Moloids are living in it, and eventually create a planet, and eventually that planet's about to blow up, and they send off their Moloid son, just like Superman. Like it ends with the beginning of Superman, but it's a Moloid character, which is
it's also like what H.G. Wells, like the Molochs and the like
the Time Machine.
No, that's
the Morlocks.
Is that Will?
That's
Is that
Morlocks.
Will?
yeah.
And I mean, I've always been into like kind of freaky art, and you had brought up that French comic strip.
Yeah.
And so it's this, it's kind of obscure even in France, indie French comic strip artist, and his pen name is Pierre La Police, which is like Pierre the Police, basically. And
Pete Police.
and it was a mini series in particular that he had. I think it was like in an indie music magazine. He just had strips, and like my mother's boyfriend at the time was like collecting them for me, because they were like surreal. They were about like a superhero like brother team, but everything was like it was like the words were like almost like word soup, like kind of sort of nonsensical, but like had the right tone of like, this is an adventure story, you know. and the drawings were super grotesque. Everybody looked gross, and they all had weird powers, and just strange things happened, and I just found them really fascinating. And it was called Les Mousquetaires de la Résurrection, which means the Musketeers of the Resurrection.
Oh wow!
And you know, it was just bizarre. And I'll see if I can dig it up to put in the show notes.
I remember spending a lot of time looking at these. I don't remember them being superheroes at all.
Could you read us a little dialogue, Jules? Is there anything?
If I can find a strip,
and then
I will.
quickly translate it.
You would need to just say it weird.
But it's
Oh, you talk funny.
Yeah, you talk accenty.
But it was great. But yeah, talk about, like, I'm glad you brought them up. I should have thought of them, because it was super freakish. Like, here's an example. Here's an example panel you can look at. And the cover is even better, because they're painted hyper realistically. And because they have like odd proportions and stuff, it just makes them look even more grotesque.
Yeah, we'll put up some links to some of this.
If you can go back, if you see a colored image in there, like it's terrific. But he continues to this day to make like strange comic strips, except now they're more like the other series he did was more like fake news kind of stuff. But yeah, good, interesting, weird
this is
stuff to
definitely
check out.
Yeah, we'll put some links to that in our show notes.
You know, looking at these now, like with 15 years different from the last time I saw them, it really reminds me of the Stardust, the wizard, the super wizard.
Oh yeah, that we had covered a few episodes back.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So Keith, how can people find this book?
That was kind of one of the problems with my making this pick. I realized after making this pick, it's out of print. You can find it at used bookstores. You can buy it on
graphic novel form.
Mm-hmm. You can buy it on eBay and things like this. You can buy it on Amazon. People are still selling it. But I was reading it and sharing it through Marvel. Marvel has a digital version of it on their through their service. I subscribe to their service, and you can use their digital. Read it digitally on any of your devices, and actually their PDF reader thing is really neat. They have a really good setup for using, you know, for
they do the panel zooms and stuff on there.
You can switch it off or on. You can switch it on so that it kind of zooms in on each panel and shows you just part of the page at a time, or you can just see the whole page.
Cool.
And you can toggle it. It's pretty neat.
Very cool. All right.
Yep.
Good stuff. Well, I recommend
So
it.
it's Fantastic Four, big in Japan. Fantastic Four and Iron Man, big in Japan. written by Zeb Wells and drawn by Seth Fisher.
Yeah.
Came out in 2005. A really, really neat comic book.
All right.
Yeah.
Sweet.
My pleasure.
All right.
To such a question, there are many possible answers, such as hard work.
Years ago, the holies are gonna
Feel I'm alone in this whole of existence. I know it takes time, but I'm losing my persistence.
So thanks everybody for listening to another episode of New to You Show. We're going to be back next week for our finale of Freaks with my pick. So before we get into the end of the end, I was your host for one of them, John Holt. You can find me on Twitter at Lord Joho. Jules, where they can be finding you is?
They can be finding me on Twitters at Beautiful Jules.
And they can find me on Tumblr, Keith Vincent, at earthlingkeith.tumblr.com.
And this has been Adam Mater. You can find me on Twitter at LLLMater, LLL.
All right. So we'll put up links to everybody's contact information on Twitter. We'll put links to the awesome
The
comics.
Musketeers of the Revolution.
Yeah.
Resurrection.
And some art from the Fantastic Four, Iron Man, Big in Japan, and some links to other stuff we talked about in the show here. If you guys want to find out more, go to newtoyoushow.com. You can also follow us on Twitter to find out news about the show at newtoyoshow.
Review us on iTunes so I don't have to.
Yeah, make
Yeah.
Jules do it. Sign our petition for Jules to finally rate and review us on iTunes.
First, I'd have to listen to the show.
You don't have to.
I don't care for the show, quite honestly.
You should subscribe and follow on iTunes or in your favorite podcasting app so you don't miss any episodes. So you find out the latest and greatest new to you.
Yeah.
All right. Gang, it may not be new, but maybe it was new
New
to
to
you.
you! Explosion sound.
Pitiful life is all about the music.
be with him together forever, without the limitation of time ever again. So the second coming of the Lord is not dead. They're two separate entities.